Good morning. I want to start by saying thank you for this opportunity to share part of my story. In sharing our stories, I find that we often come to find that we are all more alike than we are different. One of my favorite authors is Joseph Campbell. He's a literature professor who studied mythological, religious, and folkloric stories from all over the world. He came to see that there's an archetypal hero's journey that transcends culture, geography, and time. It's one universal story. It's the story of our lives. The journey starts with a call that forces the hero, us, to leave the ordinary world, to defy the guardians, the institutions and the norms that keep us confined. We cross over the threshold and we enter into the unknown. From here, we encounter the many trials and tribulations. We wrestle with temptation. We reconcile with our past. And if we're brave enough, we descend into the cave of the unconscious, ultimately dying to our old self before we resurrect as the new triumphant self. Sound familiar? Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Star Wars, or maybe the life of the Messiah, culminating with his death and resurrection. Perhaps this is what it means to be born again, the egoic death that awakens the soul. Today, I'd like to share part of my own journey. Weeks ago, I shared a song called Dear Me by Nicole Nordman. In the song, she writes a letter to her former self, recounting the deconstruction of her faith, finding that the only truth that mattered was love. Many of you came up to me afterwards and talked about how powerful the song was. Perhaps it resonated because, as Campbell said, our stories are universal, and we are all of us wrestling with deconstruction, whether in our own lives or in the larger scale of our society today. For myself, I grew up in the Methodist Church. I played handbells, sang in the choir, was active in youth group, went on service projects. At one point, I actually wanted to go into seminary. I always felt a very strong connection to a God of love. But in adolescence, I began to realize I was different, and the story I was taught didn't quite fit. In his book, The Road Less Traveled, M. Scott Peck writes about how when we are faced with discordant information, often we will deny our reality instead of redrawing the maps we were given or taught. In secret, I wrestled with a faith I chose and a reality I never chose. For years, I denied my sexuality, praying to God for conversion, trying to conform to the church, to society, my family. I embraced various masks to protect myself and project an image of who I thought I should be. But I was destroying my reality. I tried prayer and fasting, accountability partners, online conversion therapy. None of it changed my sexuality. Instead, I learned self-loathing, I learned intolerance, and I learned judgment. All the while, the verse that continued to echo in my mind was Matthew 11:28. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. This was my calling, my inner calling, telling me to come as I was, as I am. Many questions plagued my mind. Would I be brave enough to come out and defy the guardians? What of my faith? What of this world of black and white that I had constructed? It was limiting, yes, absolutely, but it was safe. I knew how to navigate within its confines, but how long could I survive that course? In college, after fasting for a week, I went for a walk and found myself lost. Perhaps it was a lack of food or getting to my brain, or perhaps it was just the divine intercessor leading me to help. After some time, I finally found a crossroads I recognized, and there, across the street, was a sign that read, First Stone. It was a counseling center whose name comes from the verse John 8:7, let any of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her. Was this God's invitation to begin the process of healing? In his book, Till We Have Faces, C.S. Lewis reimagines the myth of Cupid and Psyche, telling the story from the perspective of Psyche's sister, Orwell. Speaking from the pinnacle of her transformation, Lewis writes, "When the time comes to you at which you will be forced at last to utter the speech which has lain at the center of your soul for years, which you have all the while, idiot-like, been saying over and over, you'll not talk about joy of words. I saw well why the gods do not speak to us openly nor let us answer. Till that word can be dug out of us, why should they hear the babble that we think we mean? How can they meet us face to face till we have faces?" At first stone, meeting secretly with a therapist, for the first time in my life, I uttered the words which had lain at the center of my soul for years. I'm gay. And with those words, I finally met God face to face. Eventually, our life journey will pull the thread of authenticity to the surface, and we often come to find that we have been living someone else's life, not our own. With time, I realized my sexuality was not changing, and I wasn't living my life. I was living the life expected of me. With the help of therapy, I started asking questions. I read books, lots of books. I read conservative and liberal Christian theologians. I read the Hindu Upanishads. I read works by Jewish rabbis, Buddhist monks, Middle Eastern mystics. I started traveling the world from Sri Lanka to Buenos Aires to Marrakesh. My view of the world was far too narrow for the richness of humanity that I encountered. I met some of the most amazing souls, and hearing their stories, I came to see that the world is wide. There are millions of different narratives unfolding all at once. How could I reduce the world to a single rigid belief? Some people were queer, some were Christian, some were queer and Christian, most were neither. But all souls were expressions of love, incarnations of the divine spirit. In Matthew 7:15, talking about false prophets, Jesus says, "By their fruit you will recognize them." All these people with such unique stories, they may use different words and different customs, they may have different dogmas, but their fruit was good. There was love in their hearts and in their actions. What was I to make of that? As I asked questions, the world of black and white began to crumble. There was no rule or law I could imply to encapsulate everything I was experiencing. I had to accept there was a realm of gray, and that although the dualities exist, our journey is to find the authentic expression of the self, which is not found in the confines of any one identity. And I had to accept that we are neither all shadow nor all light, that both can coexist just as it did in the beginning when God created light out of darkness. The divine paradox, Alpha and Omega, beginning and end. I am spiritual and I am queer. These two are not mutually exclusive. I am an artist and I'm an accountant. I'm an American and I'm a Francophile. I'm a realist and I'm a dreamer. I am not defined solely by any one of these things, and yet all of these things are true. And so too is the body of Christ, made up of all parts, the unique expression of billions of people, all representing the divinity of mankind, made in God's image. Throughout this process, I learned to deconstruct my faith and redraw the maps according to my life experience. This was the requiem, the death of the old self, my beliefs, my identity, my perceived identity. In so doing, I had to release the interpretations of the Bible I had grown to believe. Perhaps most important for me was the realization that the scriptures were never meant to be literal, but rather metaphorical. They're symbolism. They weren't prose, they were poetry. And in this context, suddenly for me, it seemed that every faith tradition was saying the same thing, but using different stories, pulling from historical and cultural context to communicate transcendent truths in the limited form of human words. And the one unifying thread was always love. As the Sufi mystic Rumi once wrote, the astrolabe of the mysteries of God is love. The divine mystery is love. In letting go, I found freedom to be who I was, to sit in the realm of gray, to be more authentic, to be more curious in the world. I once viewed sexuality as a curse, longing just to be normal. Today, I believe it was my salvation, forcing me to ask a question and to question the world that otherwise worked in my favor. And once I asked one question, I was free to ask all the questions. Today, whereas once I had faith riddled with doubts, I would say I have doubt woven with remnants of faith. And in that space, I found peace. And in that peace, I found the ability to live and to love. And so began the resurrection of my soul, my renaissance. If nature tells us one thing, is that we live in a perpetual cycle of death and rebirth, fall followed by winter, then spring, then summer. So following every requiem, every death, there's always a renaissance. Renaissance is the French word for rebirth. For those of you who know me, there are two things I love in the world: France and Beyonce. So you can imagine my excitement when in 2022, Beyonce released an album entitled Renaissance. She's an incredible artist who pours so much intention into her work. Considering the isolation of the pandemic, the tensions around race relations, the polarization of American politics, Beyonce pulled from the pervasive pain of the collective, and in her album, she gave room for the expression of new life, paying tribute to the artist who paved the way and who paid the price for her and the many who are underrepresented. Truly an example of life in the aftermath of death. It's taken years for me to reconstruct what it is I do believe, and even then I would say I have more questions than answers. But what I do believe is this: all things are connected in ways we cannot fully comprehend. What is in one is in the whole, and what's in the whole is in the one. Faith is not certainty or conviction, but trust. Hope is a force more powerful than fear. And love defies all things. That's a part of my journey. But as Campbell said, the arc of our journeys is universal. My coming out is entirely different from my sister's divorce, and yet I know her journey all too well. Being a conservative Christian, she struggled with her faith for years, denying her reality, the abuses and the battles she endured at home. For 18 years, she endured that abuse until she finally filed for divorce. Our experiences relate to entirely different circumstances, and yet in our respective journeys, we both wrestled to reconcile our faith with our realities. We had to deconstruct our beliefs in order to discover what was more authentic and true, in order to save ourselves. Beyond personal stories, what I sense in the world right now is that we are living through a significant period of transformation, a changing world order. We are living through a great deconstruction. Though predicated on spirituality, throughout the ages, much of organized religion has built a politic of power, and it's failed to deliver its promised peace. We see that today with the emergence of the Christian nationalist movement and the prioritization and alignment of the evangelical party with political power over the simple gospel message to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly. Jesus never sought to align himself with the Roman Empire. That was power. In fact, he did everything he could to avoid power, to remain humble, to the point of dying on a cross despite his innocence. Though founded on the value of every human life, so too has liberalism and democracy been blinded by our biases and polarized by our fear. It has failed to usher in justice, equality, and liberty for all. Daily, we bear witness to the constant changing of the climate and our environment, the debilitated government and its bickering, the protests in the streets, the wars among nations. The world is grieving as the old world order begins to crumble. Our culture is full of denial and anger and rage. Depression and loneliness plague our society, and in lieu of acceptance, we are resistant, grappling with how to make sense of what is happening, wanting to go back to the time from before. I'm curious for you, what is currently being unmade or deconstructed in your own life? What identities or mythologies are being challenged? Even innocuous beliefs like good things happen to good people, when we look at our world or even our own lives, does that always hold up as true? Are we willing to release our resistance when truth looks different? At the societal level, can we acknowledge the pain of loss that all people are feeling right now? Deconstruction is a difficult and often lonely process. Can we acknowledge that we, too, are complicit in the breaking of our society? Can we see the humanity in everyone, releasing our need to villainize others? Can we acknowledge that what we see in others is not so distant from what could exist in us if the circumstances were different? Can we extend grace and compassion and collectively work towards healing the whole? Can we seek the middle ground? In the midst of the great deconstruction, when all else is crumbling, can we still choose to love? In the darkness preceding dawn, it is hard to imagine a world of light and color. So too, in our breaking down, it is near impossible to imagine a better tomorrow. We cannot help but focus on what was lost, but there is no going back to before. I do not know what will emerge from all of this, but I believe there is a way forward. That is why we need the artists and the dreamers, those who think differently, expansively, to imagine a world as it could be, not as it is, to dream of what has never been. It's hard to know where to begin. Change is never easy. The institutions were already failing us. Perhaps the prophets were right. Isaiah said, "They shall build up the ancient ruins, they shall raise up the former devastations." Perhaps it is time for the world to be remade, trusting the promise found in Revelations 21. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. He who is seated on the throne said, "I am making everything new." What if John wasn't talking about the rapture, but about the perpetual cycle of breaking and remaking until we finally have heaven on earth? The old order of things is passing away. Requiem. But the story does not end there. It is only ever the beginning. I am making everything new. Cue Beyonce and the Renaissance. I can't stand here and pretend to explain or justify what is happening in this world, other than simply to acknowledge it is an archetypal pattern. Can we trust that there is a larger story unfolding in all of this? And can we trust that this is part of the breaking and remaking of the world, the same that is part of my story of deconstruction and rebuilding, the same that is promised by the prophets in Isaiah and Revelations, the same as the death and resurrection of Jesus? Until that day of promised redemption, we are not called to understand the way of the heavens. We are simply called to love. To close, I'd like to leave you with a poem, an invitation to hope. The ghosts of our past whisper in our ear, "We have been here many times before." A house divided cannot stand. In this period of derision, the fragmentation and division, hostile words so easily exchanged, our families, our neighbors, how we are estranged. Though the words of the prophets are rearranged, the prophecy itself has never changed. All is one. Bound by both gravity and the cosmos above, the tides of duality rise and recede. The pendulum of time, it is always swinging. The systems are failing, and yet still we are clinging. And now the warning bells are ringing. The rise of factions, such loathsome actions, vitriol abounds, this rhetoric of hate, it all precipitates the fall of the state. Growth and transformation are never easy. Just as a seed must crack for its roots to take, old paradigms must die if we are to remake. For a world reimagined, something must break, though nothing prepared me for all the heartache. In this earthly existence, so momentary and brief, part of the tree of life, we're each a leaf, and our lived experience forms our unique belief. But lost in our divergent views, we fail to see the devil's ruse. Two forces opposing, it's us versus them. Forming tribes and enemies, we feed the stratagem. Our lived experience becomes truth's diadems, and those who would contradict, how they blaspheme. Each side believes they speak truth with love. while the other spews lies filled with hate. How we fail to see our commonality, the grief we'll all face in our mortality. To attack one another is to attack oneself, for if God is in everything that was and is and ever will be, then how can we not see the God within, regardless of gender or the color of our skin? In the world of spirit beyond our five senses, if we can learn to shed all the labels and lenses, we'd see a life force that flows in us all, you and I. We are more alike than we know. Can we learn to see with the heart? Can we embrace the other? In this physical realm, dare we risk love? Can we let it overwhelm? Each life is unique, revealing a different truth, lest we forget the wisdom of our youth. A time when our hearts were unfettered by fear, when the world was full of wonder, when we were curious to learn, less convicted, less stern. There's little we can control. Every day it seems the dark tide rises as the fabric of our society unravels, civility fading, respect degrading, honor and honesty abating. Though perhaps we are powerless to change the world, may we never forget that true power is found in our unassailable freedom of choice. The freedom to defiantly choose who we will be in this world, to bravely show up for others, to extend grace and forgiveness, to boldly show mercy, to act justly, to walk humbly, to love kindness. The future is yet unwritten, and yes, tomorrow remains uncertain. But may we find the courage to stand in the wake of the rising tide with the blind audacity of hope.